All right, good morning. Welcome. Good to be with you today. There's a number of people joining us online today. Everyone is.
They're coming in right now, one after the other.
One after the other. Here we go.
I held that in my lap with him.
There's someone else. There we go. Okay. Good morning. Good to be with you. This Martin Luther King weekend, let us pray. O God, our Father, whose Son forgave his enemies while he was suffering shame and death, strengthen those who suffer for the sake of conscience. When they are accused, save them from hatred. When they are rejected, save them from bitterness. When they are imprisoned, save them from despair. And to us, your servants, give grace to respect their witness and to discern the truth, that our society may be cleansed and strengthened. This we ask for the sake of Jesus Christ, our merciful and righteous judge. Amen. Well, good to be with you. Continue to admit people.
That's what that was.
Here we go. All right. I'll trust you'll let me know when somebody's up there because I have my back to it. Good to be with you. Thank you for coming back as we continue to explore this branch of Christ's Church, or the Jesus movement, as our former Episcopal presiding bishop was wont to say. So I'm slowly working through many of your questions that you had at our outset on this class. And just to recap, we've done quite a bit of history. We've done the history both of the, if you can believe, you could do such a thing in a 40-minute period, a little bit of the history of the Reformation in England and what that looked like and how that led to where we are today. We did some of the history of the Church of England in the colonies and kind of what happened when the colonies declared independence, what happened with the church. And what I want to do today is go forward from that spot, say a little bit more about that, and then go into the way in which the Episcopal Church in the United States is organized and how it operates. Because believe it or not, that's kind of like part of our question, our consciousness is, how does this denomination operate? Because that seems to be the way in which we ask questions about denominations. How are they organized? How do they operate? We ask questions about theology too, like what do they believe? What do they stand for? How do they see that through? Sure, we ask those as well. But we also ask a lot of questions about how they're organized and how they kind of operate. And I've already set up this dichotomy, which I've set up a dichotomy that I'm probably forcing a lot in order to kind of describe some general ideas about how denominations operate differently. So I'm forcing this dichotomy a lot. There's a lot of gray areas in between all of it. So this is overly generalized between Christian churches that are set up in what we call magisterial or monarchical in a sense, like the Roman Catholic Church, where there are a number of leaders who really do have the authority through the Spirit that grants it to them, the ability to kind of lay out the beliefs and the system of the denomination. That is true also, although a different degree, in the Eastern churches of Christianity. Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Armenian Orthodox, Syrian Orthodox, and Coptic in Egypt. Those branches of Christianity also have that type of monarchical system. It's a little different. There's a little bit more inclusion of other opinions in it, but all ordained people in it. They also have a pope even. That pope in the Coptic Church, for example, has a lot of authority, a little less and different authority than the Pope of the Roman Catholic Church, but nevertheless, there is a pope, right? So those would be monarchical or magisterial denominations in the way that they're set up and that they operate. And then I mentioned how there are confessional denominations. These are many of the Protestant churches, right? Lutheran, Presbyterian, Methodist, some of the main kind of Protestant denominations that we're familiar with. They operate on what's called a confessional basis. There is a confession that was decided, and this, when you become a member of that denomination, theoretically, right? It used to be like really, years ago, it was like really clearly stated, right? And now it's not so clearly stated. But nevertheless, theoretically, when you become a Presbyterian, you're saying this Westminster Confession is the basis of the faith. Those are the ways in which we look at all these questions and answer these questions. Same thing in Lutheran Church. Luther's catechism does that for Lutherans, so on and so forth. And then I kind of said that there are what we might call more free churches, if you will. I've labeled one of them what's self-described as biblical. In other words, many of the Baptist traditions would say there's no authority other than the Bible, right? Now we know that in the congregation, there are different individuals who have some authority to make decisions and so on and so forth. But these denominations are often congregationalist in nature. The whole congregation is brought on board to make major decisions for the congregation, either choosing a new minister or passing a budget or letting go of a minister, or many different decisions in the denomination are congregationalist in nature, right? And then many of them, such as the Baptist tradition, it is said that their authority is the Bible, right? So that's what I label as kind of like your biblical authority tradition. And then there's kind of free churches, that certainly in this area, the Bible is still seen as the main authority, but there's a lot less connection to anybody else. This single congregation is all that matters here. We're not beholden to anyone else. We don't really associate with any other congregations. These are free church. Many of them are Baptist, self-describe themselves as Baptist, but free church Baptist type of thing. Somebody asked about some other types of denominations as well, such as Mormonism and a couple of Seventh-day Adventist, so on and so forth. I think that's a completely separate bucket. This is Scott speaking, and there's no negative judgment there. I just think it's a separate bucket of the way in which I mean, so for example, in Mormonism, it's also monarchical. The Mormon kind of system is monarchical. Theologically, it's different than Nicene Christianity, which most of these denominations are Nicene Christianity. So I think Mormonism is in a different bucket. Unitarianism is in a maybe even a separate bucket because in the Unitarian tradition really strongly came out of all of this, but theologically kind of stands a little bit apart, if you will. And Seventh-day Adventist, again, a kind of a separate bucket, if you will. Yeah.
I was just gonna ask a question, when your summary, and you mentioned, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox.
Sure.
The word Orthodox, that's used a lot, why is that?
Yeah, Orthodox just means right belief or right idea, kind of. And so the Orthodox churches do believe that their belief, just the same way in a Roman Catholic kind of theological viewpoint, that is the right, yeah. Yeah, even though for much of the time, there's a huge tradition within the United States for people who, we have an Orthodox church here in Asheville, but for people who were Orthodox, Russian or Greek or any other, if they were in the United States and there was not an Orthodox church near them, they were told to go to the Episcopal Church because they hate the Roman Catholics. So you cannot go to a Roman Catholic church. So you were told to go to an Episcopal church, right? And we have that here before there was an Orthodox church here in Asheville. In the records of Trinity, there's lots of Orthodox members here at Trinity, and there's a burial spot at Riverside that's all Orthodox folks that Trinity owned. And anyway, so
as late as
yeah.
the 1950s, there was a regular Orthodox service in this space.
In this church,
In this space.
in this phase, in the undercroft of the church. Yeah, thank you. I believe that. Yeah. So there's your kind of spectrum, if you will. Now, what about the Episcopal Church? Well, it's a little complex. It's a little bit more complex. There's a difference between the Church of England and the Episcopal Church in the United States. Okay, so let me just kind of open that up a little bit. This is a little bit semantical. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but nevertheless, in the Church of England, of course, there is true authority. You have the Archbishop of Canterbury, who is a leader of the denomination in England. The prime leader of the denomination in England is who? The king, right? The king is the leader of the church in the Church of England, right? Bishops are appointed by the king. Now, today there is a commission of the church that tells the king who to appoint, right? But theoretically, the king appoints the clergy, the bishops. And so there is this kind of clear level of authority. It's also monarchical as well. It doesn't, just like in all of England, right? It doesn't operate in what you think of as a monarchical system, the same way the King of England doesn't formally appoints the prime minister, but doesn't really choose the prime minister. So it's its own little animal. It operates like a Protestant church in that lay people and clergy are helping make decisions, but there is a formality to it where it is a monarchical system. So you come to the United States and we have more of this hybrid. We're in now, we're hybrids, right? we have more of this hybrid way of operating and operating. Yeah, way of operating. And let me see if I can open that up for you. But first of all, I do want to say that the Episcopal Church is not monarchical, even though we have bishops. The authority of bishops is clear on a number of things, but we're not necessarily monarchical. We're not free church, right? We are connected, we're a connected congregation, so we're connected to all the Episcopal churches in the United States. And we're not necessarily confessional. We don't have one confession that you're signing on to when you become a member of the church. But what we do have is this, the Book of Common Prayer. If we have a confession, it's this. It's the Book of Common Prayer. So what do I mean by that? I mean, some call it liturgical. We're a liturgical tradition. In other words, the way we worship is the way we pray. And we have really laid out forms of worship. If I'm doing communion as a priest, if I'm doing communion in the Episcopal Church, I must do it according to this book. I can't just let Scott gets up one day and decides to, go to the beach and just do communion however he wants to do it. I have to do it according to this book, or I can be brought up on charges and defrocked. So we're kind of like a liturgical tradition, and it works also theologically. In other words, if you ask the question, what does the Episcopal Church believe about baptism, right? I could send you to the catechism, which is not necessarily a approved answer. It's a good one, and it's in the book. So in a sense, it is approved. But the real way to know what we believe about baptism is to open up to the service of baptism in the Book of Common Prayer and read what it says about baptism, right? And you would know what we believe about baptism because of the Bible readings that are chosen, because of the words that are used to baptize the individual, because of the prayers that are in the service. That says what we believe about baptism. And it's binding on me as a priest. And in a sense, it's binding on all of us as members of the church. That is baptism for us. So, for example, the best example I can use of this is back in the 70s when the Episcopal Church was debating whether or not women could be ordained, right? There was lots of conversation and theological position papers and debates and arguments about whether or not women could be ordained. But when we decided that women could be ordained, we didn't change the catechism. We didn't change a confession somewhere that people subscribe to. What we did was in the service of ordination in the Book of Common Prayer, we italicized the pronoun. So it could be him or her. That's it. That was the only decision that was voted on. Whether or not to italicize the pronoun in the ordination service. And because we changed the worship service, we changed what we believed about ordination. Does that make sense? So that's what I mean by we tend to be a liturgical church, if you will. Okay, And that is somewhat true. It's less true, but it's somewhat true in the Church of England. It's more true in the Episcopal Church. But in the past couple of decades, it's become strained, if you will, strained. Okay, so that's where the Episcopal Church stands in this spectrum, kind of somewhere in the middle, we say, in terms of we have bishops who have some authority. Those bishops are not appointed by a king. They're elected by groups of clergy and lay people. But it's still not a congregational meeting, right? So we're still somewhere in here in the spectrum.
There's also a very important difference, which is that the Church of England is an established church.
Yes, correct.
Which we most definitely are.
Correct. Yes.
And so it's rooted in the culture of England in a way that the Episcopal Church is just not.
Correct. Yeah. So
Any other.
yeah, the comment was that in England, there is no separation of church and state. There is a state religion. It is the Church of England. Right.
Which produces all kinds of stresses of their own.
Of their own. Yeah, absolutely. And that's not true here in the United States. Right. Okay. Question so far? Comments? None? Come on, yeah. Yeah, good question. Yeah, let me open those up. He's asking, tell me your name. William, thank you for asking, William. If you go to page 864 in the Book of Common Prayer. There's a section in our Book of Common Prayer called Historical Documents. So what does that mean? Right? What does that mean? Obviously, it means these are historical documents. They shape who we are, but they're still not a confession. If they were a confession, it would be like the creed. They'd be part of the opportunity to stand up and confess them in worship. But they're not that. They are historical documents that do form the foundation for who we are. Absolutely. We are Nicene Christians, as are almost all mainline and even in the Baptist tradition, Christian. Even Church of Christ, which doesn't like any creeds, would subscribe to what's in it for the most part, right? So these are historical documents, and they are central to who we are in our theology. And they're fascinating for you to look at. But if you go to page 867, what's being, it says Articles of Religion, or otherwise known as the 39 Articles. And these are articles of faith, almost as a confession, that if you were a member of the Church of England for a long time, no longer, you had to subscribe to in order to be a member of the church. And this goes through the traditional Protestant questions about theology in the life of the church, everything from predestination to the place of saints to what we mean during communion, to the ways in which you may obtain salvation, to one of my favorites, the top of page 873, the unworthiness of ministers. Right? In other words, one of the questions was, is communion valid if the priest is a sinner? Right? And the church decided in its wisdom, thank God, that communion is valid no matter how sinful the priest is. Because the priest isn't making it happen, God is making it happen, right? So you can see those everywhere in these 39 articles. So there was a time in which these were needed to be subscribed to, almost like I'm talking about with the confessional kind of congregational outlook, right? But they're not, they don't need to be subscribed to, either to be ordained in the Episcopal Church or to be a member of the church. Is that helpful? Yeah. Thank you for asking that. Yeah, go ahead.
Would the church then be, quote, the American version of the Church of England?
Yeah, let me get to that. Let me get to that, but thank you for asking. Yeah,
This changes,
yeah,
and somebody really likes the old version better.
yeah,
I really, really, really like the old version.
yeah,
What happened?
yeah. Oh, boy, you ask the toughest questions. Pathetically, different things have happened in the past, right? Most recently, the General Convention of the Episcopal Church has said that all books of common prayer are valid. Right? So they could be used at any congregation. Yeah, yeah.
How much does the Episcopal Church vary across the United States? So I haven't been to that much.
Yeah, right.
But it feels like in California, Boston,
Yeah.
a little bit of a different animal.
Well, you're starting out in the right place. This is the standard by which you should go. Because the answer to your question is that they can vary greatly in terms of what we call adiaphora, or things that don't matter. But they, in order to be an Episcopal church, communion has to come from the Book of Common. And that could be done any way. It could be done with guitars. It could be done with organ. It could be done with clergy who have vestments on. It could be done with clergy who don't have vestments on. It could be done in a building that looks like this. It could be done in a building that's a garage. It could be done just kind of in any way. So there is a great deal of difference throughout the Episcopal Church. Yeah. Good question. Peter?
Well, Scott, back in the old days, not so long ago, because my whole ministry was in the Southeast,
Right,
I used to go to California every church meeting
yeah,
to get a sense exactly what you're saying about how different we were and how much of the same we were.
yeah. I saw a question over here. Yeah. Yeah. There's the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is a, African American denomination that is set up around the principles of the Methodist Church. And in the Methodist Church, there are bishops, or Episcopal, right, is the Greek word for bishop. So there are bishops. They are offices different than the way bishops operate in the Episcopal Church. So that's a denomination, African Methodist Episcopal Church. Before the Methodist Church became the United Methodist Church, it was called the Methodist Episcopal Church. Okay, because it was Methodist, but they wanted everyone to understand that they were led by bishops, right? And that's different from the Episcopal Church, the Protestant Episcopal Church in the United States of America. And we do bishops differently, right? So in all of these denominations, from the Episcopal Church and the Church of England to the Orthodox churches to the Roman Catholic churches, bishops are for life. It's a an ontological ordination. You are ordained for a bishop, and when you're ordained to be a bishop, you are always a bishop. The church could, if you mess up, the church could say you can't operate anymore, but you're still a bishop. In the Lutheran Church and in the Methodist Church, there are bishops, but it is an office. You're elected to be a bishop for a term of 5 years to lead a group of people, and when your term is up, you're no longer a bishop.
But with the Episcopal Church,
We do terms, so I'm elected to be, well, we do and we don't. The bishop of this diocese is the bishop of this diocese for life until they retire. And when they retire, they are still a bishop. They're no longer leading this diocese, but they are a bishop. In the Methodist Church, after you serve your 5-year term, you're no longer a bishop at all. Do you see the difference? Right?
When there's an annual or a triennial convention, that's, but even the retired bishops are welcome to attend and participate in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
Council of Bishops.
Right. So let me describe how the Episcopal Church in the United States was set up. And as you can imagine, just think about your timeline and your history. All of this happened at the same time. The United States declares independence from Great Britain. They have to set up a new government. So all the guys in Philadelphia are setting up how this government's going to operate. Over 50% of those guys were members of the Church of England. So at the same time, we have to decide how we're going to set up an Anglican, if you would, church in the colonies. And guess what they do? They set up the Episcopal Church in the United States to be almost the same thing as the government of the United States, right? So let me just describe how that operates. In the Episcopal Church, as you get in all of these denominations, from Roman Catholic straight through to Lutheran and Methodist and Presbyterian, they use different names, but they're all what we call connectional denominations, right? They are connected, all connected to each other and have a responsibility to each other, every congregation, right? It's when you go over into congregational models, such as the Baptist Church and the Congregationalist Church and Church of Christ and Disciples of Christ and all in that group of congregations that you get congregational authority, if you will. All of these denominations are what we call connectional. And in the Episcopal Church, we have, it's by geography. And in the scripture, we have hints of this, that leaders oversee Christians in certain areas, geographical areas. And so that's how leadership is set up in most of these denominations. And so we have, so in the Episcopal Church, we're set up as dioceses. In the Methodist Church, it's called conferences. In the Presbyterian Church, it's called presbyteries, right? So we have all these dioceses throughout the country. And there's 3 in the state of North Carolina. There's one in East Carolina. The Piedmont area of the state is a diocese, and the western part is a diocese. So there's 3 dioceses in the state of North Carolina. Each diocese has a bishop. Some dioceses have more than one if they have a lot of people in them, although there's only one who is the leader of it. And in each diocese, there are lots of different congregations. Every clergy person belongs to a diocese. I am under the authority of my bishop as a clergy person. I can't go be a clergy person in this diocese unless my bishop gives me permission. Which does happen, kind of just, unless you're a problem. Canonically resident in the Diocese of Western North Carolina. So, let's say Western North Carolina, the Piedmont area is called North Carolina, and the other is called East Carolina. All right, so these are the three dioceses. We are in Western North Carolina. Our bishop is Jose. And we have about 50-some congregations here in Western North Carolina that are part of this diocese. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Retired clergy are still a member of a diocese. Yeah. You're still a member of this diocese. You could move away, you could move to California, but unless you request to be transferred from this bishop's authority to another bishop's authority and it's approved, you are still a part of this diocese. I know. Yeah. So you have all these dioceses. There are 100 and, oh gosh, I'm not gonna get this right, but there's somewhere about 120 dioceses in the United States of the Episcopal Church. So again, in the Methodist Church, these are conferences. In the Presbyterian Church, these are presbyteries, right? Of course, in the Presbyterian Church, there would not be a bishop. There would be a clergy person who takes on the same role as a bishop. But nevertheless, we'll leave that alone, right? In the Methodist Church, there is a bishop who serves for just a certain period of time. So that's kind of how many of these connectional churches are. The Roman Catholic Church operates this way with dioceses. Now, the Pope in Rome has the authority over all these dioceses, appoints the bishops to the diocese and can unappoint them and move them and so on and so forth. But still, it's set up geographically. The idea is still the same in how it's set up geographically, right?
Deanery.
Oh, that's too detailed for this class. And so, and then every 3 years, all of these dioceses choose 4 clergy and 4 lay people to come to what's called a general convention. And they sit together in a general convention. It's one of the largest conventions in the whole country, and make decisions for the church together. A bishop in a diocese is chosen by representatives or delegates from each congregation in the diocese, both clergy and lay people. So when a diocese needs a new bishop, each congregation in the diocese, both lay people and clergy, send individuals to a convention of the diocese that elect a bishop. So the bishops here are chosen in this kind of democratic process, a more democratic process, right? This general convention is made up of 2 houses. House of Bishops and the House of Deputies, which are both clergy, priests, deacons, and lay people. Both of these houses, just like in the government, have to agree in order for a decision to be made for the church. The clergy have a little bit of a veto power in that there's clergy in this group as well. And in this group, even over here, these folks have to agree too. In order for something to be a yes on something. So if all the clergy say no, then it's a no. Now, if all the lay people say no, it's a no too. But there's a little bit of, there's a deference given to the ordained in our system, a little bit of a deference given to the ordained. Why is that? Well, say the proposal is made that we change the theology of communion. We do give a deference in the Episcopal Church that the ordained have been trained in theology. And they ought to have a little bit of a, upper say in how the theology of the church gets interpreted and said, although sometimes I trust the lay people more than I trust the clergy. Nevertheless, Chris. But within one house, there can be a no too. That's a little different. Yeah.
So with choosing our bishop in our diocese, it's 50-50. If they ever came to heads and no one could decide with the clergy and make that decision.
No, not in that situation. If we had multiple ballots, 20-some ballots, and we would wait for somebody to back out. Yeah. Somebody to back out. Yeah.
Does the bishop for the diocese, does that person necessarily come from within the diocese or? could
Does
they come
not.
from anywhere?
They just have to be an ordained priest. Mhm. Yeah. No. No term limits. It's for life. Now, in practicality, most bishops don't serve beyond 10, 12 years. Yeah. But they could if they want to.
Could they be removed by vote as well, though, or not as a bishop, but removed as the acting bishop?
Yeah. There is what's called a disciplinary procedure. And so there has to be a valid claim. It's almost like impeachment. There has to be a valid claim that the bishop has not met their responsibilities. And then there is a procedure for that. There's a procedure for that for all the ordained, including me. And so there's a procedure for that. Yeah.
So at general convention, is a new presiding bishop only elected if the current presiding bishop is retiring?
Retiring or retiring because their term's up, or we just decide they want to retire, or death. That. Correct, that's correct. What she's saying is that this group of people, there is one bishop who presides over this house. And through the years, this person has become I don't really want to use this word, but a pope figure for the Episcopal Church. Now, that's not true because they don't have a lot of authority that way, but they become the face of the Episcopal Church, presiding bishop. And they do lead the staff of the national church. So, and that person is elected for a period of 9 years. So this position is not a archbishop type of thing. It is an office. Because the title is clear, this group of, originally, this person didn't lead the whole church. They just presided when this group of when all the bishops met. Right? They were the presiding officer of the group when the bishops met. Through the years, the Episcopal Church has been enamored with both corporate American structure as well as authority. And through the years, this person has taken on lots of roles in leading the church, but never really been given any authority for singular decision-making, right? The presiding bishop cannot call the bishop Jose and say, you will do X, Y, and Z about A, B, and C, unless it's a discipline type of thing, right? So their authority is limited in the church. It's not the same as the Pope, for example. Yeah.
Was our presiding bishop Mike?
Michael Curry was the presiding bishop and Sean Rowe is now the presiding bishop.
Right, because
Yeah.
Mike retired, right?
Yes, he
Okay.
did. Yeah. Questions from all this? This is a little fast, it's a little overview, but it gives you a sense of how the Episcopal Church kind of operates, if you will. Yeah.
How did it come to be that the Archbishop of Canterbury is?
Yeah.
I don't know what to say.
Canterbury is in England.
Yeah.
England, like,
Well, because the very first ordained person that back in the 800s, no, was it 800s? 600s, I think, that the Pope sent to be a clergy person to the British Isles was to Canterbury.
why is that decision?
There was no decision. Let me do 10 minutes, okay? 10 minutes. What's being asked is about what's called the Anglican Communion. What this is back in the early 1900s. The British Empire was falling apart. Okay, let's bear with me here. The British Empire is falling apart. Throughout the globe, the British Empire had set up Anglican or Church of England churches all over the globe. Right? So prime places where it was more prominent, of course, was India, for example, right? So India, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, right? And other places, even in Africa. Do you know where most people descended from the Church of England live? Nigeria. Right? If you were to get all the Anglicans throughout the globe together, over 3/4 of them would be Black. Okay, so the British Empire had set up churches of England throughout the globe. Slowly, of course, the American colonies were one of the first to kind of declare independence and set up its own denomination. Eventually, all of these places set up their own denomination whose history was from the Church of England. They have a prayer book. They have a structure that's very similar to the way the Episcopal Church operates in the United States, right? So as the British Empire is falling apart in the early 1900s, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who is the lead clergy person of the Church of England, and the then king decide, wouldn't it be good if we got the leaders of all of these now independent groups that were connected to us are not Anglican in a way, Anglican being a word that signifies the Church of England, right? Wouldn't it be nice if we get them all together every once in a while? And the king said, I'll invite them to tea. Right? So the Archbishop of Canterbury lives in a palace called Lambeth Palace. Lambeth Palace. So they called this the Lambeth Conference every 10 years. Most of its history, it has been just that, no more. The leaders of all of these churches, say the presiding bishops of all of these churches, come every 10 years to Lambeth, meet with the king or queen and the Archbishop of Canterbury. They have dinner together. They have a big garden party at Buckingham Palace, and they get to know each other, so on and so forth. There had been nothing more to this until some of these churches decide to ordain women. And all of a sudden, some of these leaders, such as in Nigeria, say, I'm not sure I want to meet with people who do that. And then tensions start to happen in this group. And you can only imagine what happens when some of these churches say gay people can be ordained, right? And so this becomes a big hubbubaloo. Because some of these, not Australia, but some of these churches say, we want this group to make decisions for everyone. No gay people, no women, right? If you're going to be a part of this, you can't do that, right? The problem is, each one of these are completely separate denominations. We have a history, you know, they're a cousin, we're cousins, but you don't let your third cousin make decisions for your family, do you? Right? So this is called the Anglican Communion. It's a lot like the Commonwealth of Nations, if you're at all familiar with that in former British colonies, right? And it's quite strained today because of the fact that some of these denominations operate quite differently than others. Now, I think it gets lost on us Americans sometimes, for those of you who follow these things. I know that not everybody does, but anyway, that, Christianity in Nigeria is very different than Christianity in the United States, right? There is religious pluralism in Nigeria. Nearly 50% of the population is Muslim, for example. They're operating in a very different environment, right? And so I get a little anxious that we equally try to impose things on other churches in the globe, as we are frustrated that they try to impose things on us. One of the big challenges, so I'm gonna just say this and we'll be done, but one of the ironic aspects of this whole conversation is that as churches in places like Nigeria, we're saying we're not sure we want to be with these churches who do things like ordain women or gay persons. The bishops from Nigeria who showed up to this meeting brought 2 or 3 wives. So it's like, oh, this is very interesting. So, It's just very interesting. That's more information than you need about the Anglican Communion, but nevertheless, we are part of the Anglican Communion. And for now, anyway, we'll see how it all plays out in the long term. Yeah. Yeah, every denomination sets their own. No, no. Every independent group has their own prayer. And so, yeah. You can see that. Yeah, you can see that. Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Whether or not it's okay to do.
Like, for example, in the Canadian prayer book, do they hold the 30 mark?
No.
Yeah, so after a bishop,
Right.
the churches in the US, or Episcopal churches that became then Anglican, now they
Right.
report to a bishop. A lot of them report to bishops in
Yeah.
Africa.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me do that next week.
Okay.
But my goal today was to describe to you, generally speaking, how the Episcopal Church kind of operates. And I think I've done that. You may still have questions, but it is, I would leave you with this, we're more set up along the churches in this line of the spectrum. And yet we're a Protestant church. So there is lay involvement in the life of the church. It's not the same type of lay involvement as a Congregationalist church, right? Where there's a congregational vote on that decision for just about anything that could come across, right? If they wanted it. Somebody could call for a congregational vote on just about anything, right? So it's not that type of lay involvement, but it is different than in, like, even today in the Roman Catholic system, right? The priest of the church, there is a kind of parish council, but it doesn't have quite as much the authority as the rector or the pastor of that congregation does. I mean, they really can set the agenda for that congregation all on their own in many ways. I only wish I could do that. No. Joking. All right. Great to be with you. I'll be with you next week. Please be sure you sign the clipboard on your way out if you haven't signed it. Great to see everyone online, and we'll see you next week.